So one of the people who has carried on, and I'm going to have people wave when I introduce them, the legacy, the turn, the bending towards justice, and has carried on her father's legacy is Reverend Dr. Bernice King. She's the CEO of the King Center, which is founded by her mother, Coretta Scott King. And from this position, the same one held by her mother, Dr. King continues to advance her parents' legacy. Through her work at the center, she educates youth and adults around the world about nonviolent principles modeled by her parents. Thank you, Reverend Dr. King, for being here with us today. Thank you. Second person is a dear friend of mine who is going to make lots of history and good trouble in the House of Representatives. Yes, he's going to have to be elected on November 3rd, but given the way in which he won his primary, door-to-door, knocking on doors, talking to, I think, virtually everyone in CD 16 in New York, you're going to see a lot more of Jamaal Bowman. He's the Democratic nominee for, and you know, I would say the betting is good that he's going to be the member of Congress from New York's 16th District, representing parts of Westchester and the Bronx. Dr. Bowman has been an educator and an advocate for public schools for over 20 years. He most recently served as the principal of CASA, a public middle school he founded in the Bronx, and I have had the honor to know him and be a thought partner with him for many years, and I've had the honor, great honor, to be walking the halls of his school with him. Jamaal, just wave. Leslie E. Redmond is a civil rights advocate, and at the age of 25, she became the youngest president of the Minneapolis NAACP. Leslie stood on the front lines after the unjust killing of Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, Justin Damon. She's also the founder of the Don't Complain, Activate campaign. And Leslie is joining us. You just see her picture. Leslie is joining us by audio, not by video. Thank you so much, Leslie, for being with us. And then we have a teacher in New York City, Sari Beth Rosenberg. She and I are Twitter friends, and we direct message many times a week. She's been teaching at the High School for Environmental Studies in New York City. It's a public school there, and she's been teaching there for 18 years. And she's published a lot of articles about racism and has produced a social studies curriculum for the New York City Department of Education as well. But the reason that Sari is here is that during her distance learning classes, as we all kind of converted in a nanosecond at the middle of COVID, in the middle of March, to distance learning, she changed her history lessons to incorporate more civil rights, Black Lives Matter curriculum and content, and she did it as things were happening, in light of the George Floyd murder, in light of the protests, and she also shared them with all of us, and you can see some of her lessons on sharemylesson.com site, which, by the way, we have just hit 1.7 million registered users, but also on PBS. And it's the kind of thing that teachers do in terms of taking materials and making sure we make them real and plain immediately. And I wanted to thank Sari for that work, because it's the work that we need to keep on doing over and over again. So obviously, I would want to start this panel with a question to Reverend Dr. King. And so as we reflect, and I suspect that every time one of our giants die, your mom, John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, that all of this must beget lots of emotions for you. And there's huge responsibility that you take up, in some ways, as the living seed of a future, because of who you are and what you have decided to take on yourself in taking on the King Center and taking on your father and your mom's legacy. So what's your vision? Give us some learning, your vision, next steps that we at the AFT should actually do to help actualize your father's dreams.
Well, thank you very much, Randy and the AFT for having me today. One of the things that I think is very important, since we're talking about teachers and educators, is that we've got to find a way to create new curriculum. And I'm glad that Sarah is doing a lot of writing in that area to introduce into our school systems. Part of the problem is that we have left out some critical parts of who we are as America. A lot of who we are as Blacks in America, in terms of our contributions to this nation, things that we have built, things that we have invented, the true stories of, the Black Wall Street, all of that kind of stuff is missing out of our history. And if we can raise up new generations of people who understand and value the contributions of all citizens of America, I think it's one of the ways we can begin to do away with systemic racism. It's kind of hard. It's difficult to correct our system, but I think we can restart some things from an educational foundation so that as people think in the future about policy, as people engage in their area of social change, as people create policies and practices in corporations, these will be the generations of young people who now understand the true essence of inclusion and ensuring that everybody feels like they belong in whatever arena of American life. So that's one of the most basic and fundamental things that I think that can happen from the education community.
I'm going to ask Sari and Jamaal to jump in here as well in terms of how do we take that? Like, what's the next steps that we do to make it real and meaningful, and what can we as the AFT do to help do that? Jamaal, you first, and then Sari.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad we started with school curriculum. I mean, this is essential. K to 12, anti-racist, anti-hate curriculum has to be implemented in every school in this country. As a Black man in America, I did not learn about my history in public schools. I had to go outside of public schools to learn about my history, to learn about my culture. And in doing so, I was able to increase my self-esteem and self-worth within this country. One of the endearing or continuing legacies of racism is this idea that to be white makes you superior and to be Black makes you inferior. But when you learn about your history and your culture, you realize that that's not the case. And then you could begin to live on an equal playing field with those who are white or those who represent other cultures and those who represent other differences. And it's very important also to not just talk about the African-American experience in this country and our contributions in this country. It's very important for us to connect to the African diaspora and the Black diaspora throughout the world, because it's quite different to learn that your history started as slavery, right? There are many kids who believe that they entered the human experience as slaves, when in reality is we have a rich and long history back on the African continent, and where someone of Irish descent or Italian descent can connect directly to a nation and learn more about their past and their history and culture and everything that comes with that. I still do not know which country in Africa my family originated from. So that's a big part of the conversation as well. And in terms of federal policy, since I'm going to be entering Congress, we need to incentivize states and school districts to implement Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and multicultural curriculum. And when I say anti-hate curriculum, I'm talking about curriculum that deals with anti-Semitism. And if we implement that K to 12 and we incentivize the implementation of that, we can see transformative change for generations to come. So I'm really excited that we started the conversation there. Thank you so much, Dr. King.
Great. Thank you, Jamaal. Sari.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's an honor to be on this panel with all of you and to see you in real life, sort of, Randy. So
there will be a moment that we will see each other in real life.
I'm holding on to hope here for that. So so education hands down is the most valuable tool to dismantle racism, right? I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm lucky to teach 18 years proud New York City public school teacher, and New York State made a commitment to adopting culturally responsive, sustainable education model into the curriculum, not just history curriculum, in all curriculum. And I don't know what's happening across the country, but that's just a starting point, right? And I agree. We have to not just focus on an American history course. It needs to be across the board. And we need to talk about decolonizing curriculum across the board. And it's going to look different ways in different classes. And you asked what the AFT can do. Well, it starts with who's in the classroom with the students every day. It's the educators. It's having them, I think everyone is well-intentioned. It's having teachers start with their students, educating teachers about the importance of learning about each individual student's backgrounds, their hopes, their dreams. And a mantra that I always have, that I start with when helping design curriculum in New York City and in my own classes and with other teachers at my school, is I always think of this phrase: if you can't see it, you can't dream it, right? And if I'm teaching a group of students that they don't see themselves I teach American history, right? But if they don't see themselves at all in the American story, except for, as Jamaal was saying, as the victims, as slaves, right? Or I only use the phrase enslaved people. If that's all they see in the narrative, which is not the full story, then how did they find their path to greatness, which I think they all deserve? So that's how we create an equitable society, I believe.
Thank you. And I want to, as you all know me, we are just putting out all these, instead of using the Innovation Fund for some big projects this year, that's our fund where we put out about $1 million worth of grants to our locals to try to do this kind of path-breaking work. We're doing this in terms of giving people grants of $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 right now to work in a changed environment. And so off of this conversation, I'm saying to our delegates, and we will put this out as well, if people want to try to do this work to try to create curriculum on for younger kids, because I think from what Dr. King was saying, from Reverend Dr. King was saying, we really have to actually start with younger kids. We have to actually disrupt the stereotypes and really create inclusion, particularly if kids don't have an inclusive environment at that moment. And so maybe, Reverend Dr. King, you'll work with us on this, and the King Center will work with us on this, and let's make one of the things that we do as a union, how we develop some of this curriculum, our members doing it, and then we put it up on Share My Lesson. We work with the King Center in terms of doing it on, particularly for younger kids. Sorry, we're going to use your curriculum for older kids and others, but to actually use it for younger kids.
Yes.
Fabulous.
Indeed.
And Jamaal, since we are on, I'm going to go to Jamaal, and then I'm going to go to Leslie for a second. But since we are dwelling on Congress, and you will be there January 1st, 2021, God willing. So just tell us a little bit about how you're preparing for that. Like, what are you thinking about? How are you preparing for this? And what do you think? What's your list of must-haves in terms of what you're going to do in Congress?
So that's a great question. How am I preparing? So I'm texting you every other day to get some information and feedback around how all of this works in Washington and how to best engage with my new colleagues. I mean, I'm thankful that so many members of the Hill, members of Congress have already reached out to congratulate me and to give me counsel and offer their mentorship just to prepare me for when I get there. So I'm already engaging in conversations with my future colleagues. We're looking, and I've been looking from the very beginning of our campaign at structural racism and institutional racism and everywhere it exists within our country. Right now there are protests across this country against police brutality. That's one place it exists, institutional racism. It also exists in mass incarceration. As we know, if you're Black or Latinx, you're more likely to be incarcerated and you're more likely to do longer sentences. It exists within our education system, not just in terms of curriculum, but in terms of hiring practices. So while we have been talking about curriculum, we should also talk about teacher recruitment and training practices. That's key, because if teachers are trained in culturally responsive education, when they enter the classroom, they're more ready, willing, and able to hit the ground running. It also exists, structural racism also exists when we look at wealth inequality and economic inequality. And this is historical. After the 13th Amendment, 1865, African Americans were promised 40 acres and a mule. We never got that 40 acres. Instead, the Homestead Act was passed and millions of acres of land was given out to whites, native born and foreign born, and they were able to build tremendous wealth with that land and with housing infrastructure, et cetera. African Americans were also kept out of the GI Bill, after World War II. So there's also been policies not related to education, but racist policies that have contributed to redlining, contributed to concentrated poverty, and contributed to schools being funded by local property taxes more so than state and federal government. So we're looking at structural racism in all its forms, from housing to jobs to education. That's our North Star. And I want to be a part of a Congress that creates a post-racial anti-hate society over the next few years, because the time is urgent now to get it done, and the country is demanding it. COVID has revealed what we all already knew about the inequalities, and I'm just fortunate and blessed to be a part of the conversation at this moment.
Thank you, Jamaal, and we look forward to you being there. Jamaal raises, and I'm going to go to Leslie in a second, Jamaal raises a really good point that is, we often talk about de jure discrimination that happened in the South. De facto discrimination that happened all over is as injurious in terms of what the effects have been over and over again, whether it's in underfunded schools, whether it's in our health systems, whether it's in housing, whether it's in transportation, and whether it's in wealth. We see it in terms of retirement income and retirement security. When we look at what whites generally have for retirement security and what African Americans and Hispanics have and Latinos have for retirement security. So you see racism and structural racism show up everywhere, and it's not, you can change it by, changing one police officer. You have to get to the issues of structural racism. So thank you for raising that, Jamaal. And that gets me to Leslie. You've had quite a few months right now, Leslie, that you've been dealing with as the president of the Minneapolis NAACP. And, and so I just, and I remember, we were in Minneapolis about a month after Mr. Castile was murdered. And, all the conversations and all the demonstrations at that point. But just tell us, give us some teaching, give us some preaching right now in terms of what's happening now 2 months after the murder of George Floyd. Help us understand what you're trying to do in Minneapolis. And again, some teaching to us, like we asked Dr. King, Reverend Dr. King, about what we can do in the future.
Definitely. So grace and peace, everyone. First, I just want to say thank you to the AFT family for having me President Randi, actually, you and I were together at the NEA convention last year, and Merwin Scott introduced us and sent us a picture. So it's great to see how it's come full circle, unfortunately, under these circumstances. But I think that we can find some good in this. For me, this is a very humbling opportunity. I just want to say, as an inner city public school student, a graduate now and a first-generation college graduate, and someone went on to get my JD MBA, but as someone who's the descendants of enslaved Africans and grandparents that migrated from North Carolina, South Carolina, Houston, Texas with 6th and 8th grade education, to be able to speak with you all right now is very humbling, especially during these troubling times. And so I just wanted to start with that. And also giving respect to our now ancestor, Representative John Lewis, who is no longer here with us, and Reverend Dr. Bernice King. When I saw that I could potentially be on a panel with them, I was definitely humbled, and I still am. So as you mentioned, President Randi, this is nothing new. Unfortunately, I've had to be on the front lines with Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, Justine Damon, and now I had to add Brother George Floyd to the list, and I actually came back from Kentucky not too long ago, standing on the front lines with Breonna Taylor. I was actually one of the 87 people who were arrested for standing and demanding justice for the life of Breonna Taylor. I think what this is doing is bringing everything to the surface. It's acknowledging that white supremacy can no longer just allowed to run rampant in our communities with no accountabilities. I think that we can all take lessons from people like Chief Arredondo, who is the first African-American police chief in Minneapolis, who actually held all 4 of those officers accountable within 24 hours of the videotape being released. For those 4 officers to be fired, that was unprecedented. That was the type of courageous behavior and action that we need to be seeing. For the governor to take a courageous action and actually take the case away from the Hennepin County attorney, Mike Freeman, who doesn't prosecute officers unless there's a white woman victim, and give it to our first African-American Attorney General, Keith Ellison, was tremendous. And then for him to charge those officers and hold not only Officer Chauvin, who actually had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, but to hold all of the officers who were present on the scene and who were actually complicit in allowing the situation to happen accountable. And afterwards, Chief Arredondo actually asked me to come in and administer the new oath. And the oath for the Minneapolis Police Department hasn't been changed in decades. But Chief Arredondo again took another courageous step, and he changed the oath. And the oath talks about how, one, we have a duty to serve all human beings. We have a duty, specifically talking about police officers, to protest both verbally and physically when we see that someone's rights are being violated. And I think some of those same steps can be taken when we're thinking about teachers and principals and people who have influence over these systems. For too often, we've talked about education as being the great equalizer. But if that's true, it's also been the great divider. And long before young people start getting involved and engaging with police officers, we're engaging with teachers. And I can say from being in the inner city and public schools, teachers really have been either my greatest asset or the greatest liability to my future. And so what I would urge teachers and people of impact on policy is to take courageous steps. To one, listen to Black people, listen to Black leaders, listen to Black women, because too often we think that we know what's best for the Black community versus allowing the Black community to actually show you that, one, we've experienced racism and white supremacy for over 400 years, and we know exactly what it looks like and exactly how to deal with it. And that's what we're seeing in Minneapolis, and that's why we've seen some progress, is because, one, now you have not only Black faces, because I don't believe that all skin folk are your kinfolk. And so it's not just about having Black faces, but having conscious Black people in power who are actually wielding that power towards goodness and justice. That is exactly what we need to see. And I think that if given the opportunity, we can rise to the occasion. And I want to thank you, President Randi, because I do think it's important that you started off the conversation, because what you are displaying is how you can utilize your privilege and power and lend your platforms to Black conscious people and people who mean good intentions for Black people, and it's super necessary. And I'll just end with saying, don't complain, activate. That's my campaign. And the idea is that you don't have to be President Barack Obama or Beyonce Knows Carter in order to activate your community. You could be a mom or a dad. You could be a teacher. You could be an activist and attorney as myself. We can all activate. We all should activate. And I believe we can activate through 3 C's of activation: communication, collaboration, and compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And I, again, just like we said about the curriculum work, what we want to do is during this convention, this virtual convention, we scroll a lot of things before each session. So we're going to scroll some of the things that you have on Don't Complain, Activate campaign. And this is what I want you to do, Leslie, to help us. We have something called Our Voices, where members and others write things for our website, and we distribute them far and wide. And I want us to be really involved, if you want us to, in the Don't Complain, Activate campaign. It's kind of like don't complain, organize,
100%.
Exactly.
Yes, I love that.
Fabulous. And then, because, we have to always take what we say to action. Words mean a lot, but action means more. It reinforces the words. And so I want to just put Sari on the hook for a second before I go back to Reverend Dr. King. All of us, like we had the AFT, we've done the Racial Equity Task Force and Committee that Dr. Loretta Johnson started. We released, I am told that we were the first union to release our report. We will continue with that work. You saw yesterday we passed a resolution in June. We have 19 commitments, covenants that we are doing, including diversity to try to diversify our teaching force. But just like me, Sari, you and I are both white. So how are you thinking about how you have these conversations with white colleagues? How are you doing it? How are we taking the lessons that Leslie just said to us?
I'm glad you asked me that. And first off, remind them of their privilege, because I think that, yes, everyone has been, especially, immediately after the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the list goes on and on. I'd fill up my space if I listed all those murders. As that became something that people were being forced to pay attention to on their Instagram feed, our role is to not make that go away and actually have those public conversations with our colleagues and discuss white privilege. I had a conversation with a guest in my class one day, Dr. Uhuru Williams, and I shared my story of how I experienced white privilege with Dr. Williams and my students who are primarily Black and brown, not white. And just sharing that story with your colleagues and making your white colleagues see it, because even though I think that everyone has the best intentions, especially if you get into education, and especially if you're working with, as we like to say, diverse populations, but people who are not white, students who are not white. I think we all have the best intentions, but I think we just need to just have more brave, honest conversations about it with each other, so that when the educators go back into the classroom, they're aware of it. And they come into class in an authentic way to then listen and raise the voices of their students. So I think in a nutshell, it's being brave, speaking out, perhaps dealing with pushback from your colleagues, because I found that sometimes the first step when you bring up these really, which shouldn't be in 2020, but they are difficult conversations around racism, sometimes people don't respond great. They push back, they act out. Be ready for it, but have faith that you're doing it for a greater good, and it'll click. I like to believe it clicks. And it might not click with everyone, but you have to be brave and take those risks with your white colleagues, because just keep thinking of your students and how, like, I love what Leslie said about the education is always called the great equalizer, but it can be the great divider as well. And I can completely see that, right? Because especially as a white educator, if you're not aware of your privilege, and then if you're not aware of the fact that sometimes the best way to learn, the best way to teach is to silence yourself and listen to what your students are saying. If you don't realize that, then you can't make education be the great equalizer, right? So that's my advice. Be brave and be willing to deal with the pushback and the uncomfortableness of it.
I see Reverend Dr. King shaking her head a lot as you were speaking. Do you think that makes sense, Reverend Dr. King?
Yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense. One of the things that my father wrote in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos and Community, in the World House chapter, is that we must learn, to live together as brothers and sisters, or together we'll be forced to perish as fools. And that learning does require a lot of listening. It requires understanding that there are things you just do not know. It's giving up your right to be right, so that you can deeply engage the other person. I think that if we're going to make any progress in this nation now on the racial front, it is going to take the white community really stepping up to the plate now. For the last eons of years, Black people have been fighting this fight and doing it alone. And I would say for the most part with dignity. And the only way that we're going to see substantial change is when the white community really has these serious, in-depth, honest, transparent, forthright, courageous, brave, every word that you can think of, tough and uncomfortable. That's a word that needs to be put out there. It is going to be uncomfortable because it means you're going to have to give something up. Daddy often reminded us that the first stage of the movement that they were fighting didn't cost us anything. It didn't cost anything to integrate lunch counters. It didn't cost anything to integrate most places. But now when we move toward equality, or what I would say equity, it means that there's going to be a dear cost to pay. And there's going to be sacrifice in the process. But it is necessary if we are not going to revisit over and over again the terrible things that we keep witnessing, and those of us in the Black community continue to experience. And so I agree with her 100%. And I would also say, white people who don't have experience in the Black community need to develop those experiences, not just in the safe spaces. The safe spaces are, in the restaurant. Come into some of the Black cultural experiences. Come into the Black community. Don't be afraid. I have a white friend here in Atlanta, and it's so funny because there are times when people are saying, "Aren't you afraid?" And actually she says, "No, nobody ever bothers me." And so I just want to dispel this myth that it's dangerous in the Black community. That is not true. And you won't know that unless you insert yourself in that community and truly experience it. So that would be my challenge to all of even the white educators, because as long as we remain insulated, we're going to continue to get the same results that we have.
So we have to, sorry, you go, Jamaal.
Well, I just have to jump in.
Of course.
Reverend Dr. King is so correct. Like, there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, there's no history, documented history of white people coming into Black neighborhoods and getting beat up or anything like that. There's literally nothing to be afraid of. And what I would add very quickly, Randy, is we have to hold elected officials accountable as well. And if elected officials are not ready to adopt, introduce and enact policy that is anti-racist and anti-hate, they need to be voted out of office. And I think the AFT, as an organizing social justice union in partnership with the NEA and in partnership with other unions who really care about social justice in a real way, have to hold elected officials accountable in the U.S. House of Representatives, in the U.S. Senate, in state houses, in county houses, in city government, in school board elections. We have to hold elected officials accountable to an anti-racist agenda. And if we're able to do that, we can really accelerate what happens with our policy across the country.
So I know, I could actually spend about a couple of hours with all of you, and I know I am running out of time. I have about 10 more minutes. So I want to make sure, before we run out of time, that I am sure there's a question. I mean, we just scratched the surface, but I'm sure there's things that, the last question I want to ask everybody, and I want to start with Dr. Reverend King, is I want to ask the question I asked Dr. Fauci yesterday, that people have been asking me a lot, which is what gives you hope? In a situation right now where we have these 3 crises that have been made worse by an elected official, Donald Trump, but they're all the through line between the racial reckoning, the economic recession, the COVID, is all you see the inequality. And frankly, those of us in the labor movement, we're pretty comfortable with a class analysis. But we have a hard time with understanding that's a class and a race analysis. We're going to be really honest with each other. I know that, the UAW, AFT, others helped in the March on Washington in 1963, but it was for jobs and justice. We're comfortable with the class analysis. But what about how we do what Reverend Dr. King just said to us? So what gives you, in the last few minutes, what gives you hope in this moment?
I think there are 2 things that give me hope. Other than my strong Christian faith, one, I've been in conversations and dialogue behind the scenes with people who are really trying to make some changes, particularly those of influence in places of power, even in corporate America. So that gives me hope, because I don't think that has ever happened before. Right. But it has happened because, and this is my second hope, is because there's been a generation of young voices who have dared to not let us go back to business as usual, to not let us ignore that Black Lives Matter. For the past 8 years, they have been consistent with that message about Black Lives Matter. And their fervency about it, I think, is giving me hope. And the fact that they are determined to do whatever is necessary. And I don't mean in the violent means, but do what's necessary so that we can make these substantive changes and transform America so that we can begin to eradicate racism. So it's the youth that give me hope, and it's the people in places of influence right now that give me hope that I have not seen before in terms of the 2 operating at the same time.
Thank you. Leslie, what gives you hope? And Leslie, someone just texted me the picture from last year.
From last year.
I love that.
Look at us. Full circle moment. So what gives me hope, and this is actually something Reverend Al Sharpton talked about at George Floyd's funeral. He talked about the fact of all the young and old white people that are standing up and activating during this season. And I can say I've personally seen that as well. When we were locked up, and that was my first time being locked up, FYI. When we were locked up in Kentucky, we had just as many of our white sisters sitting there with our Black sisters. We are constantly seeing that white people realize that no longer can they sit on the sidelines, but that this is just as much their fight as it is ours. And I have to remind people that the NAACP was founded by white and Black people, and recognizing that our brutality and our suffrage is not ours alone. And so I'm really looking forward to white people taking their rightful place in the struggle and recognizing that this is not white against Black, but this is humans against white supremacy.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you for helping to lead us. Sari, and then I'm going to end with Jamaal. What gives you hope?
So, of course, everyone on this panel, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on the panel with everyone, you give me hope each and every day in all the work that you're doing. And I'm going to say, of course, teachers give me hope. And I wasn't the only teacher who shifted gears when the people took to the streets in response to George Floyd's murder, multiple educators, thousands of educators across the country changed their lessons around too. I just know it. So it gives me hope that teachers are willing to really want to get into these brave conversations with their students. But I'm going to say my students, the students I personally know, give me so much hope. Yesterday, I can't leave them alone. I hopped on an IG Live with them. And
Wait, what did you just say you hopped into?
I hopped on an Instagram Live, just like a live of my students. They know. They're always like, oh, you're back. Yeah. They're not even my students. They're going to be seniors next year. And I just wanted to see what they were up to. And I didn't expect this, but I kind of expected it. They're out there. I have students part of Integrate NYC. And one of my students informed me, he's the president, Noel, shout out to Noel. He's the president of the student council next year. Well, he's now the current president. He's organizing not only a Black student union at our school, he's not stopping there. He's working with students across the city of New York who are also setting up Black student unions to create an inter-union agency of sorts. So these kids, a lot of them didn't, their parents wanted to stay home and safe when the protesting was happening. They were working behind their screens as well to either educate themselves, which is a form of activism, as we know, and I tell them every day, and going above and beyond when they have so much that was so hard for them, losing their junior year, seeing their friends, having problems, there was a lot of illness in their families related to COVID and stuff, but they are all activated. And they're doing it in such creative ways and brave ways. So I know that's not just happening with my students, it's happening across the country. And we saw that before the global pandemic. And I only think it's just as troubling and as difficult as this time has been. What gives me hope is that we're all still fighting. And I think we're even more inspired right now because we see what the stakes are, and my students are leading the way. But I agree, it needs to be all of us together. I tell my students, it can't just be, I hate when people say, well, we messed up things, your generation has to fix it. No, it needs to be, you need white allies, and you also need everyone in on the fight. And it needs to be, as we've seen in the streets, I've been inspired not just by my white brothers and sisters out in the streets, in finally waking up and getting out there and putting their bodies in the line, but it's multi-generational. We all need to work together here. And I'm inspired that my students are leading the way, but I'm telling them I'm there with them. So that's what's inspiring me, just to name a few things.
The protests that I've been at have been all multi-generational and all multiracial. And to your point, and as many of you know, I live in Inwood, New York, the northernmost little town in Manhattan. And, I've seen a lot of teachers come up to me to say, that are walking and protesting as well. Jamaal, you get the last word. What gives you hope?
Everything everyone has already said gives me hope. Humans against white supremacy. Thank you, Leslie, for that. And I think that's what we're all talking about. Diverse coalitions have taken to the streets every single day since George Floyd's murder and are now working in coalition, in conjunction, across race, across class, across religion, across differences to push back against a system of oppression. That's what gives me hope more than anything. I mean, in this election here, we triple voter turnout. We triple turnout amongst young people and people of color. We had kids telling their parents they better vote for Jamaal Bowman. There were people who wanted to take pictures with me, selfies, and say, oh my God, my daughter is going to be so excited. And when I asked, how old is your daughter? The woman told me 15 years old. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing young people, our elders, our seniors, working together in conjunction, pushing back against an oppressive system. So the diverse coalitions in our streets that are holding elected officials accountable and demanding change, that's what gives me hope.
So I want to just say one more time, again, I could be with, they're just amazing. It's so odd to be doing this virtually, but this way so many people get to see us. But Reverend Dr. King, thank you for everything you've done and will continue to do. And I want our membership, I want our members, please get involved with the center and please support the King Center. We need to actually support these amazing resources and jewels that we have that have been doing this kind of work for decades, for centuries. We need to support the King Center. Leslie, we also need to support, to the members who are listening, we need to support Don't Complain, Activate campaign. And we need to support the work that Leslie is doing. Remember, and I didn't say this before.
Coming out, Don't Complain, Activate.
Say again, did I say it right?
I have a book that's coming out, Don't Complain, Activate.
Fabulous.
I'll let you know, President.
And as soon as it comes out, we will make sure that it gets publicized. So thank you. And Leslie,
Thank you.
is the youngest president of the Minneapolis NAACP? I think, are you really 25 years old?
I'm 28 now, but I really was 25 when I took over.
Wow. And then you have, and then, Sari, and she's absolutely right, the kind of changing up lessons, really taking on issues, having hard conversations, even with the pushback. Don't be silent, engage. This is righteous work that we need to do. We can't just leave it to our amazing reverends or rabbis in the pulpit. This is righteous work we need to do every single day. And Jamaal, your kind of advocacy, Jamaal Bowman, your kind of advocacy, the work you've done at CASA and the work you're going to do in Congress is extraordinary. And we just can't wait to see you in the Congress, walking that floor, talking to your colleagues, and having yet another teacher in the Congress, but having a civil rights and justice warrior in the Congress in the footsteps and the legacy of John Lewis. So I want to thank all of these amazing people and this amazing panel. And again, I want to just remind people that we have the 19 commitments, covenants, I call them, not commitments, that we have made, including making anti-racism training part and parcel of every bit of training that the AFT does, in line with both what Reverend Dr. King said earlier, and Sari and Jamaal and Leslie said earlier. How do we make sure we embed every single day in the work that we're doing? So thank you very, very much to our panelists, and I'll see you soon, virtually or otherwise. Thank you.